Okay, let's unpack this. Europe's at a real crossroads, isn't it? Facing, well, all sorts of pressures, climate change, geopolitics. It's a lot. So today we're doing a deep dive into the continent's really ambitious plan for its energy future. Keeping the lights on, industry running, cleaner air, the whole package.
Yeah.
And we're specifically digging into this fascinating new study called Costs and Benefits of Highly Ambitious Energy Transition Pathways for Europe Energy.
That's right. This deep dive, it really takes apart Europe's energy transition, looking at several different scenarios. It focuses hard on how crucial renewables and, well, interconnected energy systems are.
Yeah.
And then it breaks down the costs and what you actually get out of it. For you, listening, understanding these different paths isn't just academic. It's really about grasping the huge decisions coming up that will shape, well, everything from energy bills to Europe's standing in the world.
Yeah, it's pretty striking how recent events, the wild weather, the supply chain chaos from the pandemic, and obviously the geopolitical crises sending energy prices through the roof, how they've all kind of converged. It just hammered home Europe's reliance on imported fossil fuels, didn't it? Pushing up costs, hitting competitiveness. It really makes it clear this isn't just about climate change now. It's fundamentally about energy security, too, sovereignty even.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating, I think, is how these crises have really sped up the talk around defossilization, getting rid of fossil fuels entirely. It's pushed that conversation beyond just climate folks into, well, national security and economic planning. And globally, the pressure's on. The IPCC, the UN, they're calling for much faster cuts in greenhouse gases, like a 42% drop from 2015 levels by 2030 just to keep the 1.5-degree target in sight. But this isn't simply swapping gas boilers for heat pumps. It's bigger. It's a structural overhaul. Experts call it electrification-based sector integration.
Okay, sector integration? Sounds complex.
It just means connecting everything power, heat, transport industry to a clean electric grid. And a huge piece of that puzzle is power to X.
Power to X.
Yeah, using clean electricity to create other things we need, like green hydrogen, synthetic fuels for planes, maybe even chemicals. It's about making a truly interconnected system where eventually almost everything runs on renewable electricity, directly or indirectly.
Okay, right. This is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because the goal might be clean energy,
Hmm.
but the speed and the actual path you take, that changes everything. And this study maps out three pretty different journeys, like shifting gears on this transition. Could you walk us through those?
Sure, let's break down these three pathways. First up is the medium scenario. This one gets to carbon neutrality by 2050, hits 40% renewables by 2030. But the key thing here, it's not enough for the Paris Agreement's 1.5 degree C target. And importantly, it means Europe stays pretty reliant on imported fossil fuels for a while longer, which carries those security risks we just talked about.
Okay, so medium is, well, medium. Not quite hitting the mark. What's next?
Next is the high scenario. This is really the core of the study. It imagines Europe hitting 100% renewable electricity by 2040. And the whole energy industry system, carbon neutral by that same year, 2040. Now, this one is compatible with the 1.5 degree C target. And it boosts energy security because it phases out all fossil fuels and nuclear power by 2040. It's ambitious, definitely, but the study maps it out as feasible.
100% renewable electricity by 2040. That's a significant jump. And the third one, you said, is even faster.
Exactly. The progressive scenario. This is the real speed demon. We're talking 100% renewable electricity by 2030, and the whole energy industry system carbon neutral by 2035. This is genuinely groundbreaking territory. Nobody's really modeled this speed for Europe before. And the potential here is quite remarkable. It could actually allow Europe to become a negative CO2 emissions continent after 2035.
Negative emissions, how does that work?
Well, by actively capturing CO2 within Europe, using renewable energy to turn that CO2 into synthetic e-fuels, and then exporting those fuels. When those fuels are eventually used somewhere else, the CO2 released basically cancels out the CO2 captured in Europe. So Europe's activity leads to a net reduction in global CO2. It's a really innovative concept.
Wow, okay. Three very different speeds, especially that progressive one. But the big question always comes back to money, doesn't it? So what does this all mean for the costs?
Well, what this study finds pretty consistently across all scenarios is that the power and heat sectors, they defossilize first. And the main reason is simple. Cost. Wind power and solar PV are already basically the cheapest ways to generate electricity in the system modeled here. So they lead the charge.
And the scale of that shift, you mentioned it's huge.
Oh, it's immense. In the high scenario, electricity demand nearly doubles by 2030. And just the generation from wind and solar PV alone needs to be more than all the electricity Europe used in 2019-2020 combined.
Wow. So what does that actually look like for you, the listener? Are we talking wind turbines everywhere, solar panels on every roof? What's the main infrastructure change?
It's definitely a mix, but the study points towards mainly large-scale installations driving this. Initially, wind power dominates, particularly in places like Western Europe and the Nordics with great wind resources. But then later on, maybe from the 2040s, solar PV installations really take off and actually exceed wind power. Solar becomes the main electricity source. Crucially, this study concludes Europe has enough renewable resources to meet this massive demand in all scenarios. And quite significantly, it finds there's no necessity for nuclear power or for fossil fuels with carbon capture to make this transition work. That differs from some other studies out there.
Right, that's a bold statement, no necessity for nuclear or CCS. Given that other models often include them, how does this study justify leaving them out? What makes it different?
It really comes down to a few key modeling choices and assumptions. This study takes a very integrated view of all the sectors, power, heat, transport, industry, and how they can provide flexibility for each other. It also banks heavily on the falling costs of renewables, batteries, and electrolyzers, and assumes we can scale up things like hydrogen really quickly. Other models might be more conservative on those cost drops, or perhaps they don't model the sector coupling quite as tightly. That can create a perceived gap that technologies like nuclear or CCS seem necessary to fill. This study basically says if you go all in on renewables and flexibility across the whole system, you don't need those other options.
Okay, that makes sense. And what about heating? Has that transformed?
Heating sees a similarly dramatic shift. Electric heating, especially heat pumps, becomes absolutely central for homes and buildings. Direct electric boilers play a big role too, especially for industrial heat. Bioenergy has a place, but it's strictly limited to sustainable sources. Think waste, agricultural residues, that sort of thing. No dedicated energy crops. And here's a cool detail. Later in the transition, they actually see recovered heat from those power-to-X units, the ones making e-fuels becoming a major source for district heating systems.
So waste heat from making fuel warms homes.
Exactly. It's all about maximizing efficiency, using every bit of energy.
Okay, electricity and heat covered. Now let's tackle the trickier parts. Transport and industry. How do they fit into this electrified future?
Right. These are often seen as the hard-to-abate sectors. For transport, the study uses a two-track approach. First, direct electrification wherever possible. That's mainly road transport cars, buses, trucks. This gives big efficiency gains pretty quickly. Plus, those EV batteries can actually help the grid through smart charging and vehicle-to-grid, V2G. Your car becomes a sort of mini storage unit.
V2G, right. Turning parked cars into grid assets.
Precisely. Then, for sectors like shipping and aviation, where batteries aren't practical yet, it's indirect electrification. That means using renewable electricity to make e-fuels, synthetic kerosene for planes, ammonia, or methanol for ships. But it's important to remember this is less efficient. You lose energy in the process of making the e-fuel. Direct electrification is always preferable if you can do it.
And industry. That's a massive energy user.
It is. Some parts, like cement and steel, actually see their energy demand decrease a bit, thanks to more efficiency and recycling. But the chemical industry is a different story. Its demand for feedstock, the raw materials to make chemicals, actually goes up quite a bit. That's partly due to assumed growth, but also because making e-chemicals from electricity and captured CO2 is energy intensive. The numbers are just staggering. The demand for e-chemicals and e-fuels reaches over 4,200 terawatt hours.
4,000.
Terawatt. Yep. For context, that's more than 10 times Europe's total electricity use in a typical recent year. And producing the green hydrogen needed requires almost as much energy again, around 5,500 terawatt hours. But here's the clever part. Those electrolyzers making hydrogen and the synthesis units making e-fuels. They can be run flexibly. They ramp up when there's lots of cheap renewable power and dial back when there isn't. So they aren't just huge energy consumers, they actually become part of the solution for balancing the grid.
Okay, so that flexibility is key. But with so much wind and solar, which obviously aren't available 2047, how do we keep the lights on reliably, minute to minute, day to day, even across seasons? What about storage?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? This study dives deep into flexibility. It identifies different tools for different timescales. For short-term balancing, think minutes to hours, batteries are king. Along with pumped hydro storage, the traditional workhorse, and, as we mentioned, EV batteries using V2G. For the medium to long term, bridging gaps of days or weeks or even seasonally, hydrogen storage comes out as the most cost-effective solution. Store hydrogen underground when renewables are abundant, use it later. And then there's what the study calls virtual storage. This is really smart.
Virtual storage.
Yeah, it's things like hydrogen feedstock storage for industry or large thermal stores for district heating. Instead of storing electricity as electricity, you use surplus cheap renewables to make something valuable and storable hydrogen or heat. Often that's cheaper than building massive battery farms. And again, that flexible operation of electrolyzers and synthesis units is massive. They act like a giant sponge, soaking up excess renewables. This drastically reduces the need for conventional batteries, especially in that super fast, progressive scenario.
Makes sense. And you mentioned earlier how regions connect. How important is that cross-border cooperation?
Absolutely critical. The study finds that while individual regions can generate most of their own energy, strong grid connections between countries are essential. They help stabilize the system, share resources efficiently, and make sure generation and storage are used optimally across the continent. In the high scenario, for instance, the amount of electricity traded between countries reaches almost 2,000 TWh by 2050. That's about 17% of total demand. It's not just nice to have, it's fundamental to making the system work efficiently and affordably.
So that begs the question, what if countries don't cooperate? What if everyone tries to go it alone? Did the study look at that?
It did, yes. They modeled a scenario with limited interregional energy exchange. And the results are pretty sobering. The overall annual cost of the energy system goes up by 1.5%. Okay, maybe not huge, but significant. More worrying, imports of e-fuels from outside Europe jump by 20%. So less energy sovereignty. And the need for storage within each region balloons. Battery capacity needed goes up 20%, methane storage up 80%, hydrogen storage up 65%. You basically have to overbuild storage in each isolated pocket. Plus, you end up curtailing, basically wasting 30% more renewable energy because you can't easily send surpluses to neighbors who need it.
Wow.
So yeah, the conclusion is stark. Cooperation is vital for success, efficiency, and avoiding risky dependencies on global markets.
Okay, let's circle back to the cost question again. With all these massive investments, e-fuels, storage, what's a bottom line for our wallets? Are these super ambitious paths actually affordable?
Right, this is crucial, and maybe a bit counterintuitive. Even though the cost of generating renewable electricity and heat keeps falling, your overall energy costs might actually go up compared to 2020. This study projects an increase of between 6% and 33% in the overall cost of energy and feedstock, depending on the scenario.
Wait, increases? Why? I thought renewables were cheap.
The renewables are cheap. The increase comes mainly from the cost of producing those specialized e-fuels and e-chemicals for sectors like aviation, shipping, and parts of industry. Making them is very energy intensive, so they cost more than the fossil fuels they replace, at least initially. But here's an interesting trade-off the study found. Allowing some imports of e-fuels, they calculate an optimal level of just 7% of total energy demand actually brings the overall energy cost down significantly in Europe to around 51-55 euros per megawatt hour in the medium and high scenarios. The progressive scenario, aiming for near total energy independence, ends up being more expensive, around 64 euros per megawatt hour. That's 16% higher than the high scenario.
So a bit of strategic importing saves money, but complete self-sufficiency costs more. A classic trade-off.
Exactly. And then the study threw some curveballs at the system to test its resilience. That's where it got really interesting for me.
Oh, like what?
Well, first, they simulated a massive natural gas shock prices jumping to 100 euros per megawatt hour.
Ouch. Like we saw recently.
Precisely. And what happened in the model? It just massively accelerated the phase out of gas. Costs did bump up slightly in the very short term, but they stabilized by 2050. And get this, the shock actually reduced total CO2 emissions over the period by 6% because it forced a faster switch to renewables. It basically pushed the system towards that faster progressive scenario, showing how high fossil fuel prices can, paradoxically, accelerate the transition. The system adapted.
That's fascinating. So the system bends but doesn't break and actually gets greener faster under pressure. What was the other test?
The second test was about technology costs. What if solar panels, batteries, electrolyzers don't get as cheap as we hope? They modeled a scenario where these key tech costs were 50% higher by 2050.
Okay, that sounds like it could derail things.
You'd think so, but remarkably, it does not lead to dramatic changes in the energy system structure. The overall energy costs only increased by less than 6%. It shows the system is surprisingly robust. Because there are multiple renewable options, wind, solar, etc., and multiple flexibility options, batteries, hydrogen, demand response, the system can adapt and find alternative pathways if one technology becomes unexpectedly expensive. It's not reliant on just one silver bullet.
So wrapping this all up, what's the big takeaway from this deep dive into the costs and benefits of highly ambitious energy transition pathways for Europe, energy study. What should we leave our listeners thinking about?
The core message, I think, is that a faster, more ambitious energy transition for Europe isn't just wishful thinking. It is possible. Yes, it involves higher overall energy system costs compared to today, mainly due to those e-fuels, but the study frames these costs as acceptable, especially when you weigh them against the huge benefits: energy security, climate action, cleaner air, potentially new industries. But it hinges on two absolute must-haves: really strong cooperation between countries and supportive, stable policies to drive the massive investments needed.
Right. And fundamentally, it seems to come down to those twin engines.
Hmm.
Massive growth in renewable electricity and electrifying everything possible, directly or indirectly.
Exactly. And this study really highlights how those two trends feed each other. Electrification creates flexible demand from EVs, heat pumps, electrolyzers that actually helps integrate all that variable renewable energy. This flexible demand reduces the need for quite so much dedicated electricity storage, like batteries, making the whole system more efficient and cost-effective. They amplify each other's benefits.
Okay, so here's a final thought for you, the listener. This study, like most energy models, projects continued growth in energy demand. And it doesn't really dig deep into things like major lifestyle changes or the social challenges of building all this infrastructure, public acceptance of wind farms or new power lines. So given those factors that weren't the focus here, what do you think is the biggest non-technological hurdle Europe faces in actually achieving these really ambitious energy goals? And perhaps how might you in your own life or community play a part in overcoming it?